Welcome to Hollywood 2.0. We're just going to go straight into it today. Just have our panelists quickly introduce themselves, give them a minute background on their companies, what they're up to, what they want to share about what they're up to with you guys today. We'll start off with Louis Toth with Comcast. Toth? Louis Toth from Comcast Interactive Capital is here today in the house.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. So I run a group called Comcast Interactive Capital. Essentially what we do is media and communications investing. It's a fund that's affiliated with Comcast Corporation, which is a group that I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with. What we do at CIC is really invest in companies that that have interesting technologies, not necessarily dedicated to cable, but that may impact business ultimately, the various businesses of Comcast, and we're run really much more like a traditional venture fund, but we happen to have one really large limited partner, and we use that limited partner to help us with better diligence, better understanding of a particular segment or a particular investment. And then we also leverage that relationship, obviously, to improve success, rates of success for our portfolio companies.
Phil Ressler, Clearstone Venture Partners, out of Santa Monica, California.
We're a venture capital firm that invests heavily in California. We also do investments in India. We have about $650 million spread over 3 funds under management. We're about to raise another fund. Historically, we have done mostly consumer internet and B2B internet investing, as well as IT enterprise investing in communications, wireless networking, etc. But being in Southern California, we've seen in the past year and a half, an explosion of media entrepreneurs coming out of studios, out of record labels, out of Yahoo, people who want to escape corporate environment of Yahoo. And that's presenting us with a lot of opportunity that I think we're going to end up being pulled into as we invest in our next fund. So we'll be doing more media-oriented investing that's not necessarily internet-related, but it has many of the audience dynamics of the consumer and B2B internet that we have historical experience with.
Brett Close, 38 Studios.
I'm president and CEO of 38 Studios. We're an entertainment company founded by Curt Schilling, the Red Sox pitcher. Our co-founders are also R.A. Salvatore, New York Times bestselling author, fantasy fiction author, and Todd McFarlane, comic book pop culture icon. We primarily focus on online entertainment experiences in the form of massive multiplayer online products, but we also provide a broad spectrum of taps into our original intellectual property and entertainment experiences through a variety of other inlets, whether or not it's mobile, console, print media, video on demand, etc.
Allison Goldberg, Time Warner Investments.
Hi, I work in the Time Warner Investments Group. We are a venture group based in Time Warner Corporate, so we sit on top of all the operating units of Time Warner, and our goal is to make equity investments in companies that have a strategic tie or could have strategic relationships with any of the businesses of Time Warner. We usually invest anywhere from $2 to $10 million when we first invest in a company. We can lead or we can work with other investors, just depending on what makes sense for the company. And our goal is really to, one, make money and also create strategic value for our company and for the companies that we invest in. So we spend a lot of time making the right introductions for the companies that we invest in and making sure they're getting the right meetings with the people around our company to help with their success.
Mr. Hollywood, Brent Weinstein, 60 Frames Entertainment.
Mr. Hollywood. I'm Brent Weinstein. I'm the CEO of 60 Frames Entertainment. 60 Frames was built in 2007 to be the definitive independent financing model for professional artists who want to create original programming for the internet and other digital platforms. Our goal is to work with established professionals, actors, writers, directors, producers from mostly film and television to create compelling short-form content, distribute it on the web, have it supported financially by advertisers, and ultimately see some of it, when appropriate and applicable, translate to other media. We're working with everyone from the Coen brothers to acclaimed screenwriters like John August and Scott Burns, Tom Fontana, who created Oz for HBO and Homicide, writers from South Park and The Office, and a number of other people. We have 30 active projects, and we'll have 50 original series by the end of the year.
So let's go straight into the cash of where we're going to be backing up this Hollywood 2.0 revolution of content creation and distribution. This time, it's for real. Let's start with Phil Ressler and ask Phil where the disconnect is currently between the traditional venture community, for instance, a Clearstone type company, and their comfort level in getting comfortable with content-related businesses.
There are a lot of different kinds of firms and people in venture capital, so I'm going to generalize, and there will be people in venture capital who say, well, that doesn't apply to me, but it's something that entrepreneurs need to understand. There's a tremendous amount of cultural dissonance that's caused by both sides of the equation. I think there's a line in a Bob Dylan song that pretty much explains it, and that is, there's a female character in the song who says, your debutante just knows what you need, but I know what you want. And venture capital has mostly been financing needs. Most venture capital firms kind of grew up around in the IT market. They pretty much have a left brain view of what makes sense to invest in. And the reality is that at the end of the day, despite all the analysis, there's a lot of kind of gut call as to what to invest in, but it's really kind of left brain generated. Whereas most of what we see coming out of media and entertainment is really very kind of emotionally driven, right brain oriented. It's what people want, and it's hard for people in venture capital to kind of apply their model, their investment model, to kind of anticipate, well, how does this business develop? What constitutes success? What are the criteria for success? If I invest in the A round, I'm concerned about how much value is going to be generated by the progress the company makes by the B round, and I can't anticipate that. So that's the kind of dysfunction that exists primarily on the venture side. On the entrepreneur side, the problem is that most of the entrepreneurs that we see coming from the media and entertainment market, they have a history of working on projects, not in building companies. So they bring us a kind of an immature view of what it means to build a company. How do you staff it? What kind of executive team will they need? So we have difficulty developing confidence in the entrepreneur as a CEO, for instance. We don't know how scalable that person's going to be, and we're really not quite sure what kind of person would replace him with if we need to get a real company builder in.
And let's talk about that venture mindset of replacing the CEO, Phil. What is that about venture people that, they're already thinking about replacing the CEO before you start the investment?
Yeah, because entrepreneurs, they're idea oriented, and they usually are inexperienced or simply not thinking about the reality of building a company. And the company is really the value carrying and the value generating vehicle. Right? When people pay for products at the exit, they pay relatively low multiples of the revenue generated to date. When people pay for the perceived future value of the business and the company that's behind it, they pay much more. So that's just a reality that both sides have to kind of come closer to each other to close. The third thing is, and this is important, it's a dysfunction on the venture side primarily. And that is that most media entertainment investment opportunities are consumer driven. So in most consumer plays, the deal's going to go volcanic or it's not going to succeed at all. Right? Consumers tend to like to aggregate to a standard. Things become very popular very quickly. And the venture mindset is, look, kind of give me a moderate path to success that I can be fairly sure of. So you'll take an enterprise, somebody comes out of a movie studio. They come from a business where a movie can generate $100 million in less than a week if it's really successful. So why should they be reticent to commit to, say, $1 billion revenue business within 5 years? Well, they're not reticent to do that. But to the typical venture investor who's accustomed to dealing with an IT-oriented technology entrepreneur, the idea that you would generate $1 billion within 5 years seems almost irresponsible claim to make. And the venture investor is then asking this entrepreneur who believes he can build $1 billion business in 5 years to give me a nice, safe $50 to $80 million plan. In the fifth year, you're going to get there. What the venture guy doesn't realize is that If that's the only pace at which the business develops, it won't even get there. It has to grow much faster or else it's going to be irrelevant.
So entrepreneurs out there, if you're not ready to grow $1 billion business, the venture world is a little tricky to play in, just FYI. Lewis, we're working from a traditional business or media environment where we're talking about a hit-centric business, the traditional studio system, the major label systems, it's manufacturing hits. Where does the old school mindset or model bring us today in relation to the new economies of scale for broadband distribution and whatnot? Because it's my contention that the hit-centric business of the studio system isn't where we fall today in this new media landscape. We're in an environment where the economics of, okay, if you can do 3 million streams at a $30 CPM, you're talking about $90,000. If your cost of production of the content was 25, your sales force is only taking 10%, then you're at least netting 50 plus minus operational on an individual content clip that has some mainstream success. So from a big media company perspective, even though you guys are in the cable business, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, first I agree with Phil's comments about how venture looks at content traditionally, and it's challenged. It's something that we struggle with as well within our group. Unlike Time Warner, Comcast is mostly cable and has a relatively small content segment, and we're trying to work with those guys and trying to figure out some of these new business models for new types of content. So it is a hits-driven business, and I think the way I think we're beginning to see a shift in the way venture investors are beginning to look at this problem. And I think a couple things are happening. So one is sort of two main approaches that we've seen that may ultimately end up in this equation working out. And one is lowering production cost. So we've seen a number of companies where you may be relying upon a group of prosumer videographers, for example. There's a company called Turn here, which we looked at pretty seriously. I think they just got funding. Really neat idea, and the notion there is to rely upon a network of several hundred, maybe even 1,000 or so videographers who are out there based on various locations around the world, and they're coming up with original content using their own equipment. They send that in. Turn here really doesn't bear any of the production costs, but is really paying for the piece of content, and it has rights to syndicate it and advertise against it and so on. So that's then there's another company that recently got funding. I think Jonathan Miller mentioned yesterday afternoon, Generate, which is also sort of looking at how do they create various series and use a multi-platform approach for distribution. So again, the theory is low production costs. The other approach that we've seen is a portfolio theory. So if you take something like a Next New Networks, where they're looking at potentially 100 different micro channels and figuring out and sort of placing their bets, creating original content, but also aggregating content in those various areas, and hopefully they can as they aggregate that portfolio, they can move from the long tail sort of maybe to the middle section, and again sell advertising across that entire portfolio, which gives them scale, which is what one of the things that we've been talking about at this conference. How do you really get scale so that advertisers are actually interested in talking to you? So I think that those are two approaches. I'm sure there'll be others. The business models are still evolving in the space. If others out in the audience have business plans or they think they've cracked the code, would love to talk to you about it.
So you want to see everything out there, and then
Yeah, I'd love to. I think we're sort of, at least at our group, we're still in the education phase. I think with our group the difference is can we work with Jeff Shell and the Comcast programming group and figure out maybe if we, place some bets on the venture side and work with programming for distribution and working with the VOD group for distribution on that platform, maybe we can, quote unquote, stack the deck a little bit in our favor and ensure success.
So Lewis really likes to discuss these things late at night, around 11 or midnight. So just see me afterwards. I'll give you a cell phone. Any ideas that you have, you just want to call him up and bounce him off him. He'll be available to you. Just kidding. Brett Weinstein, ad-supported content, custom creation opportunities. Brett and I are in similar businesses in terms of brokering the content market. And we both are buying into the notion that the future is about ad-supported content specifically. That's where the dollars are. That's where the wins are. Brent, tell us what your experience is and why the pot of the gold is coming.
My experiences my experiences stem not only from the past 9 months at 60 Frames, but also the many years before that when I was a talent agent. I started and ran the digital media group at United Talent Agency, which was one of the largest full-service agencies in the world. Myself and the team that I built was responsible for making all the digital deals for clients that included, Johnny Depp and Jack Black and major TV writers and producers, all the way down to people you've never heard of. And really, what that taught me over the years is that talent is finite. That there's just not a lot of really talented people in the world. There's not a lot of really talented golfers. That's why Tiger gets paid a lot. There's not a lot of really talented architects. It's why the names you know are the names you know. And the people who can create consistent, high-quality, really, in the case of television specifically, serialized or episodic programming, they're making lots of money in the television business. And if it was easy, there'd be a lot more of them. So in building 60 Frames, what we decided to do was really focus on the quality of our collaborators, that we feel that there was a significant amount of user-generated content in the space. There's an increasing amount of regurgitated traditional media content in the space. I don't know if anyone checked out Hulu yesterday. It's actually really cool. But that in the middle, there was a big vacuum, that there wasn't a lot of high-quality, original content that advertisers could get behind. So our bet is that if we work with really talented people, if we put our faith and our resources behind people who have a track record in creating successful media, then we'll be able to create a consistent, high volume of quality content for the web. That consistency and the quality will ultimately put us in a position to work with brands, and that's happening already. We have a number of high-level brand and agency relationships, and big deals are on the way. And ultimately that will translate to audience, and I think that's really the bet, is that quality will attract advertisers, and that's where the business is.
So Allison, where's the appetite for Time Warner in this sandbox?
Yeah, so we've invested in a couple companies that sort of cross the content creation and the distribution side of things in what we're talking about, new forms of video content. So we invested 2 years ago in a company called Ripe Digital, and they have 3 networks that are launched. One's called Ripe TV, one's called Octane, which is targeting the first network is a male 18 to 34 edgy content for that audience. The second one is same demo but incorporating cars and the auto lifestyle, and the third network is called Flow TV, which is a hip hop network aimed at sort of a younger 18 to 34 demo. And they've had a lot of success creating lower cost content, so taking some stuff that exists already, repackaging it with hosts and their own music and their own people in the content, and creating completely brand new series. We just had an in-front event a couple weeks ago, and they've got Jamie Kennedy doing some shows for them, Pauly Shore, talent like Tyson Beckford doing an auto show. So they've got celebrities that are pretty good at what they do, launching new shows on their platform, and they're distributing across 3 platforms, which we thought was really interesting. They were doing the same shows, 2 to 6 minute episode series, distributed across VOD. So we got them onto Time Warner Cable. They were already on Comcast with a nationwide footprint. So they've got VOD carriage, they've got broadband. They distribute through a whole host of different partners on broadband, as well as through their own websites, and then on mobile. And so in January, I think they did about 25 to 30 million views across all 3 networks of their content. And it's been pretty impressive what they've been able to do on the lower cost content side of things. And on the advertising side, for them, they've come up with sort of their own format. It's called a connective advertising unit, and they've got a very short, usually 10 to 15 second pre-roll with a counter, so the user knows 10, 9, 8, 7. The content's going to start very soon, so people will sit through that. And they've got a lot of sort of logo bugs and banners underneath the video and other interesting ways of weaving the product into the actual content, which advertisers have really liked. And they're only selling one advertiser per pod, so it's sort of an exclusive environment for the advertiser. There's accompanying banner ads associated with it as well, but it's really the branding inside the video that's getting the attention of the advertisers. And they love the measurable TV aspect, so on VOD they're only paying if somebody's pulling down that stream and watching it, which is totally new concept in terms of selling TV advertising. So they've been doing really well. And we've also invested in companies like VO, which is on the distribution side, and they're doing, I don't know, 250 million video views a month at this point across VO.com and VO TV. And we've had, Ripe has channels obviously on VO, as well as a lot of our content at Time Warner as well. Turner's done some things with VO as well. So we've seen interesting things at Ripe on the content creation side, and then VO on the distribution side, and that's worked pretty well. And we're always looking for new content ideas. We are a content company. We're used to that hit risk, certainly at Warner Brothers, at Turner, at HBO, and so we're always looking for new and innovative content ideas, especially for sort of multi-platform distribution. And don't forget mobile. Ripe actually is doing pretty well on mobile. Last month they did a few million video views across that platform as well.
So Brett, you've got a business that's heavy on the gaming side. That being said, when you talk about content creation and distribution, you're familiar with multiple formats. Tell us about the multiple screens to put this out to, and how you're making sure that content goes out to these different channels.
Sure, except that I just can't resist talking about a couple things that popped up earlier. So can I do that?
You asked me?
I'll make it fast.
Oh my goodness.
So, regarding the sort of VC positioning right now, and I'm kind of out in the wilderness compared to where the rest of these guys are. I'm on the other side of the fence, right?
We are on the other side of the fence.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to me because what I'm observing in the industry, in the game industry, is everybody agrees that it's all about great content. It's all about getting eyeballs on great content and then figuring out how to monetize that. The problem there is that you can take the movie business model and try to shoehorn that onto the game industry, or the VC model, which is, as you mentioned, primarily software product based, where you understand a very clear needs analysis of every time this thing pops up, I click it and it does something cool for me, and and there's a clear monetization model around that. But when you're talking about the game industry and when you're talking about online entertainment experiences, and that's a broad, we have a very specific definition of that, but talking more broadly in terms of entertainment content delivered over the internet in various forms, you are entering into a realm that nobody can quantify very clearly. And most of that, the most largely successful products on that, especially in the game industry, but overall, required huge leaps of faith. And I would say even medium successful to wildly successful. So what that creates is conflicting interests and competing initiatives in that. Back to the movie model or the VC model on sort of smaller bites of funding for that, what that drives is a risk mitigation model that typically implies sequelizing, or finding IP that exists out there and trying to force it onto an online model or into a game based on something that already exists. And that's a huge problem, because while it is less expensive and creates the sort of illusion that it's lower risk, it's also creating an environment in which we're basically sequelizing ourselves, and people are getting really tired of that. And that's true of the video game industry. It's a lot of people debate that to some degree with the movie industry and et cetera. So I'm not saying that's not a viable model, but I'm saying there are other risks in a larger sense associated with that. And then I would sort of go back around and say that I would come back full circle and say that the biggest, most successful products have, especially in the entertainment industry, online video games require speculation about what's going to be cool in 2 years. And that's really hard for a VC, for example, to swallow. And believe me when I'm talking about it, because I've been in the industry 15 plus years and done a lot of this and done a lot of product analysis and have a strong gut feelings, and my opinions are always right. You know, it's very difficult to talk about when product costs and capital, the capital intensive nature of the industry is going up, to talk to somebody and say, you just got to trust me, this is where it's going to be. But that is the nature of the industry. So it's very interesting sort of looking at it from this side of the fence, because you're seeing very different business models that are jumping onto the entertainment industry. Largely is what we're talking about, content online that people will pay for, and trying to apply business models that have worked in other industries that I don't believe fundamentally will work unless you torque the entertainment industry a little bit, and that leads to some other issues. So let's see, multi-screen was your question.
I'm prepared to torque the entertainment industry now, unless you still want to talk about that.
I'm sorry?
Do you still want to answer the multi-screen?
I can continue on multi-screen if you like.
Let's make it a quick multi-screen.
We'll make it a quick multi-screen. Yeah, I mean the basic piece with that is absolutely that the more this is an ongoing initiative in every aspect, whether or not it's video game publishers or video on demand, being able to pull down movies on, I can go watch previous episodes of Lost on the web, I can see them on TV, and in the same sense in the entertainment industry more broadly, if I'm playing a video game on my PC, I want to be able to touch that video game on my cell phone. I want to be able to touch that world, that original intellectual property, in our case, that we're creating on a console piece of hardware, on a PC, on video on demand, on a mobile wireless device, and be able to access that in every way. And the key there is back to the business model that is sort of intangible, is that it's proven, and you guys might laugh at me, but it's proven that people will pay money for these products. It's out there. Otherwise, that we wouldn't be modeling anything if that wasn't the case. People will pay the money. What they don't have is the time, and we're increasingly competing for time of, how do I steal away from your TV watchers and get them to play more video game time, et cetera. And the key there, of course, is to cooperate in some way in terms of the number of products or the number of platforms and touch points that you can provide for them, so that they're getting video on demand, they're getting PC content online, they have web access, they have something that they can pull up and play on their cell phone while they're riding the train home, et cetera. And everybody is trying to go that direction, but everybody is doing it with competing interests. And it's, eventually it will come together, and there are a few of us that have some great ways to do that. But that's absolutely the sort of next major evolution, the next frontier in all of these industries.
Well, let's take some major whipping shots at the major studio companies that aren't here today. I'll name the ones that aren't here, so we don't dare even encroach on the Time Warner Comcast environments. The Sonys, the Foxes, the Paramounts, the Disneys. World domination through intimidation and fear, resulting in the creative community being dissatisfied in that environment. A revolution taking form in this new media frontier, and the empowerment to create and publish, and for the independents, hopefully monetize content. Just open to any of the panelists to jump in. Where are we now? How big is this opportunity to knock the legs out some of these studios, the David versus Goliath?
Well, you have the same thing happening now that we saw in the late 90s with respect to what is now called Web 1.0. And that is, in Web 1.0, suddenly you had software developers, for instance, that were in established companies, and they were unhappy in Oracle or Sun or wherever else they were, and they viewed the internet as a way to go out and directly engage customers, to get customers to come to them directly without building a large sales organization, without raising a ton of venture capital. They simply could build product and essentially debut software as a service. This is what Mark Benioff did at Salesforce.com. Today, with the web having matured into something like Web 2.0 plus, where the web, first there's ubiquitous broadband. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it's sufficient to create opportunity. The web supports sophisticated delivery of both software functionality and the media that flows in behind it. So you have people in studios who say, look, I don't need a studio anymore. I have the web. If I can create some content, I can go directly to my viewers, I can go directly to my customers, I can directly monetize the content. So that kind of entrepreneurial sentiment that we saw in software in 1999 is now hitting with content in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. I expect to see a lot more of it.
Anyone?
There's been a lot of talk, certainly over the past few months, as the writer's strike came and went, about artists, really feeling empowered and using that opportunity to, go directly to the marketplace, and the web certainly allows that. I don't know if it necessarily has to be David versus Goliath. I think that, there's always going to be room for both. I think that, you got a company like Next New Networks who yesterday, announced that they raised, $15 million in a Series B, based on, a lot of traffic, 33 million in February. That's fantastic, and they did that outside of a media company environment. I think that's really great. I think it's, fantastic that there are, programs like Prom Queen, which came out last year, which can be made at a very low cost and reach a very large audience. And at the end
from a former studio head, by the way.
From a former studio head.
Michael Eisner.
And our properties, which haven't been out in the marketplace as long, we had launched them in January, but the traffic that we're seeing is tremendous. The response we're seeing from the consumers is tremendous. The response that the advertisers are giving us are tremendous. So it's great that a lot of these things can happen without the traditional gatekeepers of media companies. But at the same time, both as a consumer, and as a realist.
And as a business person, you still want their money.
Well, I want their money, sure, but as a consumer, I'm really excited to see Indiana Jones this summer. And I can't fund that. Jordan Levin's company Generate, which I think is fantastic, and Jordan's a fantastic executive. They're not going to fund Indiana Jones. I really like a lot of the shows that Les Moonves was talking about this morning. CSI is a great show. It requires, an investment that is astronomical relative to what we're seeing spent on the web. And so I think that there's room for both. And I think the real interesting thing that's going to play out over the next year or two or three is, how do the two coexist, and how do the two benefit from each other as opposed to tear each other apart? I think that what we're going to see is that, for example, the television development process is going to change significantly, as opposed to spending money on 80 scripts which get deduced into 10 or 15 pilots which get shot, which maybe result in a handful of new shows picked up for the fall at a total cost of God knows how many tens of millions of dollars. I think that traditional media companies like networks are going to start looking towards the digital space as a source for proven intellectual property, and they'll look at brands that are proving themselves and attracting an audience, and as opposed to hearing an idea and hoping it can be written well and hoping that when it gets put on screen that it plays well. God, look online and see a show that's already working and then redevelop it, for television. I think that's another point, is that I don't see a world where we're going to, I agree in the multiple screen notion, especially when we're talking about short form, but I think that the web is as different from television as television is from film. And while formats can travel, ideas, characters, energy, I think that at least we won't be creating content that is meant to live on both platforms in the exact same form. The formats may travel, but I'm not going to be creating half-hour or hour-long shows. It's just not what I think will work.
So now that the dramatization regarding David and Goliath in the studio system is properly been squashed, we still are working number one in a hits business. But what was funny about the keynote this morning with Les Moonves is he's like, look, we're not in this business anymore of spending, that $5 million for that one script a year. It's just not efficient. We're not going to spend our $7 million on the pilots. So what we're seeing is, as a result of the marketplace, the economics are changing. And even though the high-end studio system is in the hit-centric business, and 90% of their product or profits is going to be from those big theatrical type releases from a major theme studio perspective. The question that I want to pose out to the panelists is, how are you guys seeing, and ladies, the changes in the studio system working to their advantage as opposed to them working from a place of fear from losing out in other places in the market that are gaining significant traction.
I can speak to some of the things Warner Brothers has done. You know, they've set up a Studio 2.0, which is doing shorter form, lower cost content production. And the Warner Brothers TV guys have done a really good job creating just different content for the web. So they're not just taking existing shows and trying to, they are doing that at the CW, for instance, streaming live shows, full-length episodes through Hulu and through other means, but they are creating just different businesses. So TMZ is a perfect example of that, which is a joint venture between Warner Brothers and AOL, and creating a totally new kind of product, a new kind of content, which did translate into a TV show, but different. It's not the same. It's not the website on TV. It's not the same exact video content that's on the web on TV. They're taking a format that did work really well online, and how do you bring that into TV? So they're just coming up with different concepts, and I know the Warner Brothers guys are working on several different demos and coming up with sites similar to the TMZ approach, which was how do we create a whole new site outside of our brand and speak to different audiences. So they launched something called Mom Logic at the end of last year, which is targeting moms, obviously, and creating an ad network around that, which did a couple million uniques, I think, in January, which is already off to a really good start. And so they're starting on the web and targeting certain demos, and you'll see kids and teens next with some of the new stuff they have coming out with additional sites. And once that becomes successful on the web, how do you then take that into TV, but in a different way? It's not, you know, an example of taking like a Quarter Life and bringing that to TV, taking something that's working online, and how do you create a different kind of show out of that and making it really successful, as TMZ has done. So they're doing it differently. They're not spending the same budgets that they spend on ER online, just a different approach with different people doing it too.
So, go ahead.
One other comment. I think the other thing that about this new model that favors some of the larger studios is the fact that we're dealing with different types of distribution, and distribution, at least today, as we've seen it in broadband, does favor. It does allow, you know, new startups to put their content out there, but at the same time, with economies of scale and the cost of content delivery networks, it's still relatively expensive to distribute. It's expensive to be, you know, hosting content and then working with the Akamais and the Limelights of the world, and even though prices are coming down, that's still a pretty significant barrier. So, you know, I think at least in the foreseeable future, that'll be a barrier. I think that there'll be some changes. There's a lot of debate about net neutrality, which I don't want to go into. That may affect that as well.
The audience is demanding to be heard from. Please tell us what you have to say, sir.
I just have a question dealing with what everybody's talking about with all the different areas that everyone's getting into, whereas we have program guides on our television and movie listings for movies that we're in the theater. It's all well and good to develop all this content, but how's everybody who's going to aggregate a list of all this so that people can find it easily, as opposed to trawling around on the web and maybe missing out on some great stuff? You can create the greatest content, but what people can't find.
Actually, can I jump on one piece that answers part of that quickly?
As long as you tell them it's Media Pass, that's the solution first, and continue from there.
It's Media Pass. It's absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of shifting landscape, for example, about digital distribution, and that will increasingly be an option that puts a lot more power in the hands of developers and the smaller. Takes some of that away from the larger studios. But back to kind of where the key power is increasingly, it's absolutely in branding and how, in a multi-axis sense, you pull all these things together across these various media delivery vehicles, whether it's web, video game, online content, etc. And so to me, that's exactly where the larger studios still and will continue to have a huge amount of power, is how they build these huge and very powerful brands that really electrify and galvanize the public around particular properties. And so to that piece, as opposed to kind of this disparate, a bunch of smaller competing entities versus the larger studios, you would have increasingly that problem of, well, there's nothing really big that stands out, as opposed to the larger studios delivering kind of key property that makes sense as to why you're watching it, because why you're enjoying it on whatever platform, because it taps into all these other things if they're branding it right. There are probably some other mechanisms through various software online that you guys could talk about, I'm sure.
There's I'm aware of at least 3 startups in LA that, and all of them are having difficulty getting funding, by the way, but they are attempting to essentially create a directory for video entertainment wherever it lives. It can be television, it can be on the web, it can be on iTunes, it doesn't matter. But they're really the equivalent of what Yahoo was in the early internet. Yahoo was essentially a manually contrived or compiled directory. You had a bunch of people who were prowling the web, and they were writing down and recording anything that was interesting and categorizing it and then putting it into Yahoo so that you could find it. The real answer is yet to come, and that is that I think the marketplace has to get to the point of understanding that search is insufficient. Search really only helps you find things that you already intrinsically know are there, but you just can't exactly put your fingers on them. And what's really needed is navigation. The difference is what navigation does is navigation gives you usually uses any one of various faceted technologies to give you a view of the scope of what's available, and then let you explore. You need an environment for exploration, that you can drill down and drill across and find the areas of interest, and then narrow that down to the actual content that corresponds to your interests. In a navigation scheme, and I do know that there are some startups that are under consideration by some software founders who are familiar with this area that may get funded, and if it doesn't happen soon, it will happen sooner or later. But that is what's needed, because it will be dynamic. It will be able to essentially take the ingestion of content wherever it's coming from and automatically compile it into a navigation scheme that every user can use their own frame of reference to determine how they want to explore that scope of what's available that's revealed to them.
Well,
So-
actually, on that point, I totally agree with the concern that you raised in your question. So we've actually, at Comcast, have been working on this problem for the past couple of years, and I'm not sure if you saw Brian Roberts' CES speech, but he mentioned something called Fancast, which is a new property that's just been unveiled by Comcast Interactive Media, and it's addressing that problem exactly. So essentially, the idea behind Fancast is really to be able to find any piece of content, primarily video today, but ultimately any piece of content, regardless of the medium. And maybe it's a good idea you're not funding some of these startups, these are relationships that Comcast is able to leverage a lot of the relationships it has with the existing content producers. But if you're looking for a piece of content, you may find it on Comcast Video on Demand. You may find it on Amazon Unbox. You may be able to find it on Hulu or ABC.com. And what Fancast is about is really trying to be agnostic as to where you find that content. And I agree, that with Phil, the comment on navigation being important. I think that actually probably in a world where when you hop onto a screen and you don't know where to really begin, which is the world that you see in video on demand today, I think suggestion engines become very powerful, and there are a number of companies that are in that space. I think ChoiceStream is out here in the lobby. There's Aggregate Knowledge. There are a few others that are playing around that space. So having some understanding of your of the viewers' interests, potentially, not just on the platform that they're actually at requesting the content, but maybe on other platforms that they're working on, that they use. So whether it's high-speed data or mobile or is it video on demand, you can collect that data, preserving privacy and other such concerns, and be able to present people content that may be of interest to them similar to what Amazon does. You know, people who bought this also, you know, bought this product. I think that can increase the consumption of media.
Real quick, and I'll keep this very short. I think that one thing that we like to keep in mind is that, you know, there's 10 hours of video uploaded every minute, you know, to YouTube, you know, and videos aren't necessarily being taken down at that same rate. So the amount of video available to consumers is just going to keep growing at an almost exponential rate. And I don't think all of that video necessarily needs to be cataloged, or, you know, I don't think there's a demand for it. I think that it's well understood that 99+% of those videos are going to, you know, get lost in the shuffle. I think that the ones that will stand out are the ones that are either promoted, right? So maybe they're promoted by brands, maybe they're promoted by portals, maybe they're promoted by media companies. And then others are going to get noticed just because they're good and because they've attracted a following based on organic discovery and adoption. And I think that those are the properties that will ultimately drive this as a media business. And 99% of the videos are just going to be sort of the other stuff. And it's important and it's interesting and it's fun. But I think that the properties that will drive the media business are the properties that are inherently promotable to begin with, the ones that people are willing to promote, and the ones that have found a way to generate an organic following on their own.
It strikes me that there's an obvious evolution here, which is the transition from the search-based economy to the community social network. You know, it's such a buzz thing. I hate to bring it up, but I got to go there. Kind of
engagement,
meta filter on top of that. You know, if I want to go figure out a great place to stay in Tulum, Mexico, and I go search on Google, I'm going to get however many, 1,500 hits. And if I want to go to my Facebook trusted community and ask my friends, I'm going to get, a couple of key hits that say this is the place to go, and I'm much more likely to at least start digging from that angle. And in the same sort of human filter sense, it strikes me that you're absolutely right. There's just so much content there. What you want are trusted communities that are going to help guide you in that direction. That's the MMO industry is community based. It's increasingly going to be very much community based in that trusted human interaction element rather than just raw search.
On the search topic, you talk about the phenomenon of a Google, and you look at the major media companies. You look at News Corp's balance sheet, and you look at Google's balance sheet. I want Google's business. So from where you guys are sitting in relation to the big media companies that, for the most part, historically aren't capable of breeding phenomenons, how do those worlds merge? Because you have Microsoft that wants to be in the entertainment space. They've never really been successful with the exception of Xbox. You have all of these different entities all circling the same campfire. Where is it that this all ties together other than this big media company consolidation type mentality?
I think there are phenomenons in the traditional media business. It's just different points of scale. I mean, Google.
Give me an example of a phenomenon that's not like a major theatrical release or something like that.
Well, geez, I mean, it's not film or television, but Halo. You and I talked about this on the phone. Halo generated what, $150 million in one weekend of sales. Based on $30 million of development costs. That to me seems like a phenomenon. Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a theatrical release.
Isn't that really a hit though? I mean, that's a hit. They built a franchise that was winning, and they came out with the sequel.
Maybe,
and nailed it.
But Halo was something that an independent group of developers were developing for Macintosh of all things. And when Microsoft was looking to launch the Xbox platform, they needed a launch title. They saw what was originally an RTS type game, asked the developers to recode it as a first-person shooter, and Halo was born. MTV, VH1 developed a bisexual bachelorette show, and they got this wacky girl named Tila Tequila who had 3 million friends on MySpace a star in it, and in development it was going so well and they thought they had this hit on their hands that they moved it over to MTV, became their biggest hit in years overnight. Literally like reinvented that network from a programming standpoint, which had seen a few down quarters. That seems like a phenomenon. Now, is it on the same scale that Google is? No, but from a media standpoint, when all you can do is put out content and hope that you get more hits than misses, it seems like there's still a business there. Now, how that translates to the online space, we're trying to figure it out. But I think that there are hits, and we're seeing them.
300, the movie 300 is a perfect reflection.
Yeah, I mean, that there's an argument there that it was based on, an existing Frank Miller graphic novel and a well-known, mythology. But yeah, absolutely, no one thought that it was going to be as successful as it was. And then you have something like 10,000 BC, which, with my apologies to the Time Warner people,
We had 300 today, so.
Right? Yeah, exactly. You got hits and misses.
But that's hitting the entertainment product hit-centric model. What about the technological phenomenon aspect of the business, and for these two universes to intersect? Okay, off to the gentleman in the back.
Well, I mean, I do think you're seeing that as much happening there. There's online comics, for example, to come back to the 300. There's this whole community that's being built in creators of online comics that are now generating comics, and I'm sure we're going to see new content created that'll end up on television. So I think there is definitely new communities completely intrinsic to this space, built organically, just because there's also conventions and trade shows where people go and they trade that all reflect the alternative to the big hit-based model that are more the long tail, clusters of all kinds of like niches that kind of gather together and then give themselves strength. The independent comics world is and the way it's emerging online, I think, is an area, a phenomenon that is not often talked about.
All right, well, let's talk about a technology war that just
Daniel,
culminated, unless Mr. Ressler wants to jump in here.
before you do that, it wasn't clear to me that you were asking a question or what the question was.
I have a very clear one on the next one.
Okay, but I do want to talk about this one for a bit. I think that Google is really misunderstood as a business by the studios and by the content generators. Google search is not an interesting business unless you're Google or Yahoo or potentially Microsoft, especially if they buy Yahoo. Outside of that, it's not that interesting for anybody else. It's a great revenue business. It became a great revenue business. It wasn't a great revenue business initially, but it became a great revenue business because it solved a specific problem where there was a big hole in the market, and that is that search is monetized because the marketing is transactional. It was difficult for people who were trying to directly drive a transaction through marketing to be able to do so using the web, and the web was a perfect vehicle for it. And there were all that pent-up demand moved in that direction. But the truth of the matter is that if you really look at what the major brands are doing, where the vast majority of marketing money is actually spent, it's not on driving transactions. It's driving relationships. And studios being content-oriented, and content being primarily right-brain, emotionally oriented, has tremendous power to continue to monetize the real problem in marketing, which is driving relationships for brands. Over the past 5 years, I've been in companies for 25 years and in venture capital for 5 years. So in a lot of respects, my sympathies are with the Daniels of the world.
Are you sympathies, or are you with the we?
I have been on your side of the table 5 times as long as I've been on my side of the table today, okay? But for the past 5 years, I've seen a steady stream of people, particularly being in Los Angeles, come into my office and pitch me on some kind of content play. And they start out somewhere in the first 3 to 5 slides. There's a slide that says there's $65 billion spent on television every year, television advertising every year, and I'm going to stick a needle in that and divert a lot of it my way. So 5 years later, television's lost, I don't know what, something like 1/3 of its audience, and there's still $65 billion being spent. Why is that money so sticky, right? And the reason that it's sticky is because that's emotion marketing. And that emotion marketing is where the real leverage is for major brands. And the internet is a very poor emotion marketing medium today. Now, it's going to get more TV-like, and TV is going to get somewhat more internet-like. But until the content companies and studios really understand Google for what it is, and understand that, you know, there's a difference between Google, the company's valuation, and Google, the company, the revenue generator. The valuation is large because people are focused on the future value of the business. But you can also see in the last couple of weeks that as people have started to see friction in Google's business and their ability to grow it, they lost, I don't know, something like 40% of their value off the peak. So
It's got to be tough to keep up with that 50,000% increase per year at some point, Phil, don't you think?
no, it's. I think that it's relatively new, and search, like anything else, it will start to bounce off a ceiling, and it'll become a profit business. It'll drive its valuation on profitability rather than on growth rate at some point. And when that happens, they'll be in the same plane as the content-generating media companies. What the media companies have to do is to realize what their strength is and focus on that, and ignore Google, because the content-generating studios are never going to be operating from a position of strength to drive transaction marketing. That's not their business, it's not what they're good at, and it's not important for them. And Google is never going to be good at being a vehicle for primarily driving emotion marketing where the real dollars are.
So would that mean that someone like Lewis, you know, should just be on the sidelines and invest into Google and take their piece rather than worried about the rest?
No, it means there's opportunities on both sides, but you have to understand them for what they are.
Yes, sir.
I just left the other session, which was about advertising, a bunch of analytical minds. One of the people said, it's likely that half the money spent on television advertising today is wasted, and everybody nodded their heads in agreement, but yet it's sticky. Is that why? Because it's emotion-based, and these folks are analyticals?
Yeah, that's part of it. Look, this adage that half of the money you spend on advertising is wasted, it goes back. John Wanamaker was saying that, 150 years ago in Philadelphia.
You just don't know which half, right?
I've been in the ad business. Over 20 years ago, I had an ad agency. I had a long marketing career. It's true that people believe that half what you spend on advertising is wasted, but nobody knows which half. And personally, I don't believe it. Right? I think well-crafted advertising that is emotionally motivating, that drives people to want to have a relationship with a brand, you'll find that there's more like 85% efficiency in that advertising if it's well done. The problem is, it's just like in the content world, right? A good ad is hard to create. There are relatively few people that are good at it. Those that are create a hit in the form of an ad.
Wait, Phil, is it really that there's only few people good or few good people authorizing the creation of a good ad?
It's both. I think that the talent is scarce in every area, right? It's scarce in software development, it's scarce in financial management, and it's scarce in content development, it's scarce in advertising creative. It's also scarce with respect to the business side managers whose judgment is the gatekeeper effectively for what gets approved, right?
Kind of like the ventures on the Cool Factor.
Yeah, when you're operating an ad agency, you realize pretty quickly that your creative is only as good as your client. If the client doesn't get out of the way, you're going to end up producing poor creative, and that's why ad agencies sometimes walk away from the client, because they say, I can't afford to have this in my portfolio.
So, if any of you weren't aware, Microsoft just got absolutely slammed with the loss of HD DVD against Blu-ray. Does anybody care to give us a little synopsis of the war in 1 minute or less, and then move on to how the high-end HD content market is going to play into the economics of this new playing field?
If you want 1 minute or less, there's one thing I'll say about Blu-ray. The most interesting thing is, with the war settled, I bought a Blu-ray player, and it has an Ethernet port on it. Now, so does my 1080p TV. It has an Ethernet port on it as well. So what this means is that Blu-ray, aside from being a physical medium, it has potential to be an internet-like medium. Because as soon as you connect this to the net, you can do contextual advertising. And it may even be, this may be where the studios blend with Google, because you can do contextually oriented advertising. You can also feed information back to the content owner about how that person viewed the movie, what movies that person is viewing, etc. I fully expect to see, with this format war settled, that the studios will begin to realize that since a Blu-ray disc is essentially a software application, it's got a UI on it, it's got a query system on it, it's got a navigation scheme on it, and then there's content underneath that gets served up, that they will put advertising at least in the kind of extra content area that would be contextual for people that have connected players.
Anyone else on Blu-ray?
I mean, just that the obvious pain point is Microsoft now has to figure out what they're going to do with the next iteration of the Xbox.
The license of the Blu-ray.
And that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean,
That's not a fun place for Microsoft to be in, is try to negotiate with Sony now for their Blu-ray technology. On that note, Microsoft Yahoo, no synergy, no problem. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not commenting.
What's your question?
Tell me, what's the question, Phil? Phil yesterday sat with me and we were going over prepping for the panel, and Phil's got some good ideas, so I want Phil to drive this one.
Well, it's obvious that Microsoft and Yahoo need each other. I think that neither of them can do what they want to do online against Google without having the resources of the other. Microsoft has been poor at building community, and Yahoo's been pretty good at building community. Yahoo's been terrible at building software, and Microsoft's pretty good at building software. So, the world needs something other than Google to be a juggernaut in the transactional marketing search online media market. So, who better than Microsoft to fuel that financially and to use the asset of Yahoo's community generating potential? So I think it's a good thing.
So crystal ball here. I think Rupert Murdoch wants out of MySpace and would love to wrap it into Yahoo and leverage that into a very, very significant piece of a combined entity. That's just one layman's position. The DRM rebellion. It was all about protect your content, get it safe, and then Steve Jobs has successfully deployed iTunes, and now none of the labels want to give it to him DRM free because they want competition. So they're driving everything to Amazon to create a number 2 competitor to them. Where do you guys see? I mean, right now the only transactional business I see in the marketplace today is iTunes. Tell me more. iTunes, Amazon's coming. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
From a content producer standpoint, we developed the company, wrote the plan, raised the money, sort of at the tail end of this DRM debate, so we didn't have to get into the mix. But, I want our content to be as freely and easily shareable as possible. I want people to be able to watch it where they want to watch it. I want them to be able to download it to whatever player they want to download it to. I want them to be able to send it to anybody. So for me, DRM is less of a concern. And I think we've seen that for the media companies, they've sort of, music aside, where there's still some issues, but for television, and certainly with Hulu and with iTunes, there seems to be an open mindset towards just putting the content in as many places as possible.
Especially if it's ad supported, because as long as you can track all of those views and,
Right.
and know exactly how many streams were served, regardless of where it was served around the web or on portable devices, as long as you can count that against as an M for an advertising standpoint, why wouldn't you want
Sure.
that to be open? If it's download to own or some of those other things, more transactional, it's a different story. But for ad supported,
It's interesting you say that, though, because in a weird way, DRM is driving a significant amount in the video game industry of energy towards online and subscription-based content, even if it wasn't intentionally sort of designed to be subscription-based or online content. So what would have been, let's say, a single-player product, a single-player game, is increasingly turning into something that you still get a disc, or maybe you can download it, but you have to subscribe to play it because there's no other great way to ensure that it doesn't get pirated and copyright violations and things like that.
10 seconds on that. I may have a slightly different point of view. The CEOs of one of the largest companies that manufactures and distributes massively multiplayer online games, told me not too long ago that he would never say it publicly, and that's why I'm not giving his name, but that piracy is something that I don't want to say he encourages it, but for them, you can't hack into their server to play their game on a monthly basis.
Right.
But if someone wants to duplicate the starter free trial discs a gazillion times and put it in the hands of everybody in the world, like, fantastic, because ultimately those people can play for a few days, then they have to sign up if they want to keep going, and they give those discs away in many cases anyway. So
Absolutely,
in
but
the
it's-
subscription environment, I think that DRM, I don't know.
In the 80-20 sort of rule, we're talking about massive piracy, disc over to China and then expand by, millions. So, we're talking about huge piracy issues that specifically Microsoft and a couple of others are have very clear initiatives to work on. And yeah, there's absolutely that. I want to get more mind share out there, but when you're actually seeing the bottom line cut into because there's a significant amount of piracy, there are initiatives in place. It's happening right now.
Does anybody remember when software used to come with dongles? Right? The software industry went through this 20 years ago, and every scheme in the book was tried and the Software Publisher Association was started specifically to address this issue. And you know what? By 1993, companies were doing free software on CDs and free software on web downloads by 94, and discs were distributed without any copy protection. I remember going into being a software company in 1990, going into the Soviet Union, where we had 100,000 users of software. We never sold a copy there. So we just had to figure out how to go monetize it, and we did, right? We went in and we charged for tech support, which they couldn't get before. And we began to monetize our product there. I think overall the content industry is excessively concerned about piracy. Yesterday there was an article in the LA Times. They said something like piracy is costing the film business $670 million a year. And I don't know how reliable that figure is, but it was quantified. It was cited. I don't remember which analyst group it came from. But $670 million a year out of a $20 billion business, it's like this isn't your number one concern in life. Your number one concern in life is expanding your influence and getting new customers. So I think the content industry can learn from what the conclusions the software industry came to 20 years ago on this issue, when everybody thought the software industry was going to be seriously undermined by duplication, uncontrolled duplication in China and in Russia and Eastern Europe, etc. One other thing, you said you thought that iTunes is the only viable transactional model out there. And the main reason for that is the quality of Apple's execution. When you look at everybody else that's trying to sell content on a per unit basis online, the quality of the execution is just way behind Apple's. The UI is not sensible. There's no integration from content purchase down to the device. There's no consistency in model to model. Everything else in retail, right? You have a standard way to buy things. Apple's created a standard way to buy things. Why don't people just emulate that and make it simple? Everybody's trying to make it hard by creating an owned experience, and that's a mistake.
So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the self-proclaimed king of venture capital, Tim Draper, recently said that he wants to invest in content specifically so that he can come away with the next Seinfeld type, program, which knocks everything that every venture that I'm, speaking with off the table in terms of what their mindsets are. So what we're going to close with after we get this gentleman's question right here is, where do you guys see the big opportunity in this space, content related specifically, and then relationship, if you want to add, where do you want to, where does your entity's vision see where it is versus your own personal vision? And if you want to abstain from the personal vision from a big media company, or feel free. Does this gentleman have a question?
Yeah, free discussion. Content away. If you look at the model that has existed in the entertainment business, sell the song, sell the movie, whatever. Now everybody wants to just give it away free, so you get massive viewership and make it ad support. Well, if we look what's behind the selling of all the content, all the royalties, the writers, everybody making money. Are we going to see a sea change of the amount of dollars they get back to the talent and what's behind this product? Because if you're giving it away and it's only ad supported, there's a lot less dollars, so the gain
30 seconds or less, please.
So for us, our entire business is based on working with people who traditionally make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in traditional media, and they work with us for many reasons, but one of which is that they have a significant, ownership position in the upside of the properties they create. So when we get advertising revenue, they get advertising revenue. It's not fuzzy studio accounting. It's not, let's make Titanic and claim that we're still in losses. Fox doesn't claim that, but you know what I'm saying. So the idea is that on the internet, at least, big time, television writer wants to create something episodic for the internet. They can do it in an environment where they're more free to sort of make the choices they want to make creatively. They can have a big piece of the upside, and when there's revenue, they get a piece. And if there's not, then hopefully nobody's invested so much that you lose the baby with the bathwater.
So Brett just used his time on his crystal ball prediction, so we'll start with Allison.
Well, for us, it's about investing in the ecosystem. So we will invest in content companies. I think there will be some hits out of some of these companies. Some of them are going to be more of the network approach, like the rights. Others that we're going to look at in the coming year will be more of a studio model, where you're developing hits for other people to package into either networks or other discovery mechanisms online. So I think you'll see us doing across the system. So from ad networks for video, so how do you put the right advertising in front of the right piece of content, given where that content is being viewed contextually. I think that's important. So we've done some things, companies like ScanScout, and we're looking at other companies on the behavioral targeting basis to make sure you're putting the right ad around that content for the right viewer. I think that's important. And then on the distribution side, not just through our own efforts at AOL Video, but other companies as well, we'll look to invest there. So I think you really have to look across the ecosystem and make a number of bets and see which ones turn out to be hits. I don't know if there will be the next Seinfeld and online.
Brent, back to you for 30 seconds.
I feel like I've spoken too much. For us, in terms of crystal ball, I think that, I like to think that there will be a Seinfeld online. I think that there'll actually be a number of them. I think that there'll also be a lot of continued, expansion in the user-generated content space. I think that ultimately what needs to happen is that there needs to be more standards in the field of ad sales as it relates to online video. That's coming. I think that people have to figure out how to advertise against more mature content on the internet. In television, you can get away with more at 8 than you can at 7, more at 9 than you can at 8, more at 10 p.m. than you can at 9. On the internet, an advertiser that would normally have no problem advertising against something like 24, where people get shot in the head, that's a little freaky for them because a 13-year-old can watch it at 10 in the morning. All that stuff's going to get worked out over the next year or so, and when it does, I think that the floodgates are going to open.
Brett?
Yeah, for us...
We got less than 1 minute.
Absolutely. It really comes back to a lot of what's already been touched on regarding sort of right brain emotional impact of the content out there. There isn't a lot of... We've talked about aggregation of, sort of how just content is flying around and being spewed, and in my opinion, it comes back to... this is something that we in the video game industry and the entertainment, online entertainment can take from the movie industry is great crafted entertainment experience, great online content that when you go play this quote-unquote game, it's not even really a game anymore. It's logging on to something that's an episodic novel. It's hooking into something that you really care about and that you have some emotional context. And by the way, you're doing it with you have a community online and a social network online that you're doing it with. And when you walk away, the water cooler talk is, I can't wait to see the next thing that happens in this world. And it's back to frankly the basic model of just delivering great story content, and nobody's doing that yet.
Phil Ressler, 1 minute.
Two things. First, I think Tim Draper's smart to want to invest in content. Venture capital firms are already in the hits business. They just don't know it. About 85% of what we fund fails. That looks a lot like the hits business, right? When 15% of your winners deliver the results. He has to deliver results for his investors, and why would you want to stay out of vehicles that perform like a Seinfeld? The second thing is, to your point about your question about how will writers get paid, right? If writers and everybody in the creative chain got more comfortable with the Silicon Valley model, this would all be easier to work out. Silicon Valley, a software developer who founds a company, he doesn't get paid big money until it's successful. He gets paid, he makes $150,000 to $200,000 a year if he's a VP of engineering or if he's a CEO, until he has a company that's worth an IPO or that somebody will acquire for a ton of money. So if people are willing to work on that basis, then it's a lot easier to sort out these problems since the content is going to be monetized on the come as well.
Louis Toth, Comcast Interactive Capital.
So, I outlined two models before, and I guess I was remiss in not talking about exchanges because that's another way of doing this. So I think all three of those are pretty interesting. I don't think that venture capitalists are going to be necessarily that great at picking individual pieces of content that they can fund. It's a little bit like hedge fund managers, former investment bankers picking which movies to fund, and I think you really need to take a portfolio approach to doing that. So I think for me, either having something where the production costs are significantly lower and you're able to do a lot more, where you're doing a portfolio approach across a bunch of different areas. And the other area that I think is interesting is advertising around broadband video. From very attractive CPMs over the past 3 years or so. We've been tracking that space. We've been seeing that demand exceeds supply of ad inventory. So I think there's a play that we'd like to make in that space.
Thank you to our panelists.